Rain wept from the iron awning, tracing narrow silver rivers down the slick cobblestones. After midnight, the city held its breath, broken only by the hungry sigh of the sea and the hushed whisper of tires on wet pavement. Behind Lucian De Rossi's club, in the inky maw of the delivery alley, two hulking figures wrestled a third out of the deeper shadows. "Caught her again!" one grunted, yanking a wrist. The girl stumbled, half drowned, one shoe gone. Her breath hitched, ragged and sharp, like she'd been running from a ghost. She couldn't be older than 20. Lucian's guards were used to the night's leavings, thieves, beggars, the lost. But this one was different. Her clothes, though sodden, hinted at a life beyond the street. Yet her left leg dragged, a broken thing, a whispered complaint against the harsh stone. "Boss said keep the back clear," the taller guard muttered, his voice a low growl above the rain. "She's been sneaking around for days." The other laughed, a sharp, cold sound. "Maybe she's looking for work." He raised a hand, half threat, half jest. That's when she screamed. Not loud, but a raw, thin sound that froze the alley. "Don't hurt me," she choked, her voice splintered. "I can't walk." For a single, suspended second, even the rain seemed to halt. The taller man's arm dropped, his gaze flicking to the shadowed doorway where Lucian De Rossi emerged. Lucian's leather shoes tapped a slow, deliberate rhythm against the wet stone. Smoke curled from his cigarette, a spectral halo around the muted glow of the exit light. He moved with a quiet, lethal grace, the kind of presence that made men unconsciously straighten. The girl shrank back, trembling, her eyes wide and unfocused. Lucian studied her, the fragile frame, the limp, the torn knee brace just visible beneath soaked denim. She shivered, but it wasn't just the cold. "Who is she?" His voice was a calm, deep current, far more menacing than any shout. "Caught her behind the trucks," the taller guard explained. "Probably casing the place. Could be a distraction." Lucian flicked his cigarette into a puddle, watching the ember hiss its last. A distraction? He took a step closer. The guards shifted uneasily. The girl tried to straighten, but her leg betrayed her, folding beneath her. She went down hard onto one knee. "I wasn't stealing," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. I was hungry." Lucian crouched, bringing his eyes level with hers. Rain beaded in his dark hair, trailing cold drops onto his collar. "Hungry enough to risk getting caught here?" She nodded, chin trembling. "There's food in the dumpsters after midnight. You throw out enough for 10 people. The words were stark, factual, devoid of self-pity. He saw not a beggar's plea, but an old, bone-deep weariness, the kind that came from running too long, from being unseen too long. One of his men stirred beside him. "Want us to get rid of her, boss?" Lucian's gaze dropped to the leg brace, rusted metal, frayed straps. Her jeans were worn thin at the knees, wet and torn. "What's your name?" She swallowed hard. "Alina Kova." He tilted his head. "Kova. You're not from here." "Novigrad," she said. "North side." A sudden gust of wind, carrying salt and diesel and rain, whipped through the alley. In the distance, a ship's horn mourned. Lucian straightened. "You live on the street?" "Yes, and you can't walk." She hesitated. "Sometimes. Not far. Why?" Her eyes flicked down. "Accident." The word struck him with an unexpected force. Lucian's jaw tightened. He looked from his men back to Alina. "Get her off the ground," he said, his voice deceptively soft. The taller guard frowned, a silent protest, but they obeyed, pulling her gently to her feet. She winced, but made no sound. Lucian shrugged off his own coat, a heavy shield against the night, and offered it to her. She stared, confused. "Take it," he commanded. "You're freezing." The moment stretched. The rain returned. A soft, steady veil. She took the coat slowly, as if it might vanish. Lucian turned towards the alley's mouth, lighting another cigarette. His voice drifted back through the smoke and rain. "Bring her inside. Nobody touches her." The guards exchanged uncertain glances, but none dared argue. Alina followed, limping, the oversized coat swallowing her thin frame. The uneven rhythm of her footsteps faded behind him. Inside, the throbbing bass from the main floor hummed through the walls. But Lucian didn't register it. His mind was elsewhere, in a space darker, older than his club. He didn't know why he'd intervened. He didn't know why that whispered plea, "Don't hurt me, I can't walk," had felt like a knife sliding under his armor. But a part of him, a part he thought long dead, had just been cracked open, and he hated it. The air inside the service corridor was thick with the scent of garlic, kitchen smoke, and the distant thrum of the bass. Utility bulbs cast a dull orange glow. Lucian's footsteps clicked with sharp precision. Behind him, Alina clutched his coat, her breath shallow, catching herself against the wall every few steps, careful not to lag. He pushed open a heavy door. Beyond lay a small private lounge. Velvet chairs, low lighting, a crystal decanter half empty on a polished table. The windows looked out over the rain-blurred harbor. "Sit," he said. She obeyed instantly, easing herself into the nearest chair, wincing as her legs stretched out. Her fingers trembled as she unfastened the wet, sodden straps of her brace. Beneath it, the skin was raw and bruised. Lucian poured whiskey into 2 glasses. He held one out to her. She hesitated. "It'll warm you," he said. "I don't drink." "Then hold it," he replied. "At least your hands will stop shaking." She took it, the amber liquid trembling with her grip. He sat opposite her, elbows on his knees. For a long while no one spoke. Only the low hum of a distant fridge and the tattoo of rain against the glass filled the silence. Finally, he asked, "How long have you been out there?" 8 months, she said softly. "Since my mother died." "Any family?" She shook her head. "None that would claim me." Lucian leaned back. The answer shouldn't have mattered, but it did. He'd heard that tone before. Not self-pity, just the quiet arithmetic of someone who had tallied their losses and found the sum bleak. "You said accident," he reminded her. "What happened?" Her eyes lowered. "A car. Late at night. Black, big engine. I was crossing the road after work. It came fast. Music playing, loud. I woke up in the hospital 3 days later." Lucian's jaw tightened. His own cars were black, big engines, music loud enough to drown out a siren. "Did you see who was driving?" She shook her head. "No. But someone came after, paid the doctors, said it was an anonymous donation." He frowned. "You think they were connected?" "I think they wanted me quiet," she said. "The police never found the car." A slow exhale escaped him, the weight in his chest deepening. Alina rubbed her hands together for warmth. "I was studying nursing before. Couldn't afford the therapy. I play violin sometimes, for coins. That's how I live." He noticed the faint ridges on her fingertips, calluses left by strings. "You play here?" "Sometimes. On the promenade, when it's dry?" Lucian nodded once, more to himself than her. He stood and walked to a cabinet behind him. Inside were folded towels and a small medkit, relics from nights when deals turned ugly. He set them beside her. "Let me see your leg." She froze. "No, it's fine." "Let me see it," he repeated, gentler this time. Reluctantly, she lifted the torn denim. The brace slipped loose. Beneath it, a thin, surgical scar traced her thigh, pale against bruised skin. Swelling had begun again from walking in the cold. Lucian cleaned the cut gently, his movements precise, practiced. "You've done this before," she murmured. He glanced up. "Long time ago. Field medic, before this life." Her eyes met his, curious, almost searching. "Then why this life?" He didn't answer. The silence said enough. After a moment, he taped the brace, adjusted the straps. "You need rest, not pavement. You'll stay tonight." Her brow furrowed. "I can't." "You can," he interrupted, his tone silencing even the guards at the door. "I said you will." Alina's eyes flicked between them, fear returning. "You're not going to hurt me, are you?" Lucian's hand stilled. The question cut deeper than he expected. He met her gaze, his voice low. "No one in this house touches you. That's my word." The words hung heavy, final as a verdict. He turned to Marek, his lieutenant, who had been silent until now. "Find dry clothes. Something simple. Food from the kitchen. Soup. Bread." Marek frowned slightly. "Boss, you sure? We don't know who she—" Lucian's eyes flicked up. "Do it." Marek left without another sound. Lucian poured another drink for himself, the glass clinking softly. The storm outside deepened, thunder rolling over the bay. Alina leaned back, utterly spent. "Why are you helping me?" she asked finally. Lucian looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Maybe I owe the world one good deed. You don't even know me. Maybe that's why it counts." She tried to smile, but the effort faded into a shiver. Lucian stood moving to the window. The city lights shimmered across the wet roofs below. From up here, Dravnik looked clean, peaceful, a lie he'd built for himself. Behind him, Alina's voice was barely audible. "You sound like you're trying to convince yourself." He glanced over his shoulder, caught the faint spark of defiance in her tired eyes, and almost smiled. "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow, we'll see what can be fixed." When Alina opened her eyes, fierce sunlight was pouring through the slatted blinds, a soft gold turning the stone walls warm. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The sheets were impossibly clean. A faint ghost of coffee and sea salt clung to the air, an odd lullaby to the profound silence that had finally, mercifully, descended. It had been months since she'd known such quiet. Her legs screamed as she tried to shift, the brace now a strangely comforting weight. Someone, she realized, had cleaned and rewrapped the bandages in the deep hours of the night. Pushing herself upwards, a sharp gasp escaped her lips, and her eyes swept the small room. A carefully folded stack of jeans, a gray sweater and socks waited on a chair. Through the open window, the muted, rhythmic hum of the harbor drifted in. Gulls cried somewhere, high above the terracotta rooftops. For a fleeting, desperate moment, she could almost pretend this was just a hotel. Almost. A sudden, sharp knock at the door made her flinch. "Come in," she called out, her voice a reedy whisper. Marek entered, a tray balanced in his surprisingly large hands. Strong coffee, a crusty roll, a steaming bowl of soup. His face was a mask, his eyes giving away nothing but a watchful reserve. "Boss says you should eat," he mumbled, placing the tray gently on the small bedside table. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice softer than she'd intended. "Downstairs. Meetings." Marek watched her intently. For a man built like a wall, his hands were disarmingly tender as he arranged her meal. Alina murmured her thanks. When the door clicked shut behind him, she ate slowly, each spoonful a revelation. Too warm, too kind, too undeserved. Every bite felt unreal. Downstairs, Lucian De Rossi stood by the tall arched windows of his office, the morning light slicing through the expensive pane. The rain had cleared overnight, leaving the cobblestone streets slick and gleaming, reflecting the distant shimmer of the sea and the cold geometry of the glass towers beyond the harbor. Marek entered, not bothering to knock. "She's awake," he stated, his voice flat. Lucian nodded, his back still to the room. "And quiet. Eats like she hasn't had a meal in days." Lucian's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath his sharp line. "She hasn't." Marek hesitated, the air thick with unspoken questions. "You sure you want to keep her here? People are asking, the men talk." Lucian turned then, his eyes calm, sharp, and utterly unyielding. "Let them talk." He paused, a dangerous glint in his gaze. "She's bad for business, but she's good for something else." He almost added, "She reminds me that we still live among the people we break, but let the thought hang unspoken." Marek exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "You're changing, boss. That scares them." "Good," Lucian said quietly, turning back to the window. "Maybe they should be scared." He watched the fishing boats, small dark insects against the vast blue, making their way out to open water. The morning light on the waves, so innocent, twisted something inside him. It wasn't the sea he saw, but a different image from 20 years ago. An ambulance against a blinding white street, a girl in a hospital bed who never woke up. An empire built brick by brick, a fortress against that memory, and now one crippled girl had dragged it all back from the dark. When Alina finally ventured downstairs, the house was a symphony of espresso and lemon polish. She moved with excruciating care along the marble hallway, every small step echoing the fragility of her leg. The men who passed her, shadows in the peripheral, looked away. Not unkindly, but with a palpable uncertainty, as if she were a riddle they couldn't solve, an anomaly in their carefully ordered world. Lucian was at the far end of the hall, steeped in a pool of sunlight from the large windows, papers scattered before him at a heavy wooden table. When he saw her, he rose. "You're up?" "Yes," she said, her voice thin. "I didn't mean to intrude." "You're not intruding." He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Sit!" She lowered herself gingerly, her brace emitting a faint metallic squeak. He poured her a cup of coffee, black as night, strong as a memory. "How's the leg?" "Better. Whoever fixed the brace, thank you." He offered a curt nod, his eyes unreadable. "You should see a doctor, a real one." "I can't afford—" "I didn't ask what you can afford," he interrupted, his voice edged with steel. "I asked if you'd see one." She stared at him, trying to decipher the unyielding lines of his face. There was no threat in his tone, only command. "Okay," she finally managed. They drank in silence for a long moment, punctuated by the steady tick of an unseen clock, the distant whisper of city traffic drifting through the open balcony door. Then, the question she couldn't hold back. "Why are you helping me?" Lucian's gaze remained fixed on the endless horizon beyond the harbor, the sea a painter's smudge of blue and gray. "You said something last night," he began, his voice low, almost a murmur, "about the car, the accident." She nodded slowly, her heart beginning to pound a hesitant rhythm against her ribs. He finally turned to her, his eyes dark. "I think I know who was driving." Her fingers tightened around the ceramic mug, the heat a sudden, fierce anchor. "Who?" He looked down, his jaw locking, working. "Someone who worked for me. I didn't know until now." Her pulse quickened, a frantic drumbeat. "And you covered it up?" "No," he said, his voice raw. "But I didn't ask the questions I should have asked." The silence between them stretched, thick and heavy. She could hear the faint mechanical hum of a refrigerator from somewhere behind the wall, the slow drip of condensation from an air vent. "So, what happens now?" she whispered. Lucian exhaled, a long, weary sound. "Now I make it right." That afternoon, a sleek black car idled outside the house. The driver, a silent, imposing figure, held the door open. Lucian guided her down the steps, his hand a steady presence on her arm, slow and deliberate. The city beyond smelled of sea and motor oil, a sharp, clean tang, the sun glinting off the water like scattered diamonds. "Where are we going?" she asked, the words barely audible. "To the clinic," he said, his voice flat. "My doctor will see you." The ride was a capsule of silence, broken only by the rhythmic whisper of tires on the damp asphalt. Alina watched the city unspool outside the window. Fishermen mending their nets, children chasing pigeons in a flurry of feathers, old women hanging laundry from wrought iron balconies. It was the same world she had always known, yet from the plush, insulated back seat of that car, it looked impossibly distant, a painted tableau behind glass. Lucian glanced sideways, a quick, almost imperceptible movement. "You don't have to be afraid." "I'm not," she said, her voice quiet, almost steady. "I just don't understand you." His lips twitched, a fleeting shadow of a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Most people don't." At the clinic, the nurse at reception froze, her practiced smile dissolving. Everyone knew Lucian De Rossi. Everyone knew not to ask questions. Within minutes, Alina was in a private room, a specialist gently examining her leg. Lucian waited in the hallway, arms folded, his silhouette a dark, unmoving presence behind the glass. The sterile white lights of the corridor reflected off the polished floor, cold and unyielding. Merrick joined him, his voice a low rumble. "This isn't mercy, boss. This is penance." Lucian offered no reply. Inside, the doctor's voice was soft, his explanations layered with medical jargon. He pointed to scans, illuminated the intricate damage. "With surgery," he concluded, his gaze kind, "you might walk properly again." Tears, unbidden and unexpected, welled in Alina's eyes. When she looked toward the window, Lucian was still there, unmoving, his face a granite mask. But for the first time, she didn't see explicit danger in his features. She saw something else. Guilt, perhaps. Maybe even a flicker of hope. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and the sharp, clean bite of ocean wind. Beyond the glass wall, the sea glittered, a sheet of mercury under the bright noon sun. Lucian stood at the reception desk, signing papers while the doctor's drone faded into the background. 2 reconstructive procedures, the doctor reiterated, tapping a chart. "Physical therapy for at least 6 months. It won't be easy, but she's young. Her body can still recover." Lucian nodded once, his expression unchanged. "Do it." The doctor hesitated, a flicker of concern in his eyes. "The cost will be significant, Mr. De Rossi." Lucian's gaze remained flat. "Bill it to me." When the doctor retreated, Lucian remained, staring at the form beneath his hand. Total estimate, $72,000. For him, it was a rounding error. For her, it would have been a lifetime shackled by debt. He folded the papers neatly and tucked them into his coat pocket. Inside the exam room, Alina sat on the bed, her leg propped carefully on a pillow, looking small and fragile under the sterile lights. Her violinist's hands, usually so expressive, were clasped motionless in her lap. Lucian stepped in quietly. "The surgery's scheduled." Her eyes widened, suddenly luminous. "You already? But you didn't have to." "I did. But I can't repay you." "I didn't ask you to," he interrupted softly, his voice devoid of expectation. Her throat worked, searching for words. "Why?" Lucian paused by the window. Outside, unseen, waves slapped gently against the breakwater. "When I was younger," he began, his voice a low, gravelly whisper, "I believed power could erase guilt, that if I built enough walls, I'd stop hearing the voices of the people I hurt getting there." He turned to her then, his eyes shadowed, ancient. "But guilt doesn't fade. It waits." The words hung between them, soft but heavy, laden with untold history. Alina stared at him, unsure if she was witnessing a confession or a warning. "You're not like they say," she whispered, the words barely formed. Lucian offered a faint, humorless smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm exactly like they say, just older." When they left the clinic, the sun was beginning its slow descent. The city glowed in soft amber light, the streets already alive with the evening's restless rhythm. Merrick waited by the car, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly at the sight of the discharge papers in Lucian's hand. "You went through with it," he said, his voice flat with disbelief. Lucian simply nodded. Merrick lowered his voice, almost a growl. "Boss, this girl, she's turning you into something dangerous. Soft." Lucian looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, "Maybe dangerous is what I already was." They drove in silence through the winding roads leading up to Lucian's villa. Alina watched the world slide past her window, details blending into a soft focus watercolor. Fishermen hauling their nets, children splashing through puddles, a woman locking up her bakery for the night. It all felt impossibly far away, like a fragile memory she was afraid to disturb. That evening, she stood on the balcony, leaning against the cool stone, overlooking the harbor. The air was crisp, faintly salted. Below, the scattered lights of Dubrovnik shimmered like 1,000 tiny fallen stars. Lucian joined her, an espresso cup steaming in his hand. "How's the leg?" "It hurts," she admitted truthfully, the confession a quiet relief. "But it's a good kind of hurt." He nodded, a knowing glint in his eye. Pain means it's still alive. She turned to him, studying the etched lines on his face. There was something almost human beneath the hardened armor. An exhaustion, yes, but also a raw, surprising remorse. "Do you ever sleep?" she asked, her voice barely a breath. He let out a short, rough laugh. "Rarely. What keeps you awake?" He leaned on the railing, his gaze fixed on the ink-black sea, a vast, swirling void. "Memories of the man I used to be, and the ones I can't forget." She hesitated then. "You don't have to carry them alone." Lucian looked at her sharply, the hardness in his eyes softening just a fraction. "That's not how this world works, Alina. Every man carries what he earns." Later, when the villa had finally succumbed to its quiet, Lucian entered his office. The single lamp on his desk cast a small, gold pool of light. He unlocked a drawer and took out an old, faded photograph. His sister, Chiara, caught in a moment of youthful grace, 17 years old, standing by that very harbor, a worn violin held loosely in her hand. He hadn't looked at it in years. The resemblance to Alina was uncanny, a ghost reflected in a mirror. He poured himself a measure of amber liquid and stared at the image until its edges blurred. Merrick entered without knocking, a habit Lucian tolerated only from him. "She reminds you of her, doesn't she?" Lucian's jaw tightened, a muscle clenching beneath his ear. "Leave it alone." Merrick stepped closer, his voice a low, urgent murmur. "You're risking everything. The men are restless. They think you're slipping." Lucian slowly turned his chair, his eyes now cold, distant, sharp again. "Maybe I am." He held Merrick's gaze. "But if helping one broken girl makes them doubt my strength, then they were never truly loyal. Just afraid." Merrick didn't reply, simply held Lucian's stare. Lucian gestured toward the door, his voice flat, absolute. "Keep her safe. No one touches her, not even by mistake." Merrick nodded reluctantly, the fight draining from his face, and left. Hours later, Alina still couldn't sleep. The pain in her leg beat a slow, aching rhythm, throbbing with her every heartbeat. The faint echo of an old Italian tune drew her down the hall. Lucian's office door stood ajar, a small record player spinning sunlight into melody. "E poi penso." He sat, eyes closed, lost in the music. Alina watched, the soft notes weaving a fragile bridge between them, until she broke the spell. "It's beautiful." His eyes opened, a flicker of something ancient in their depths. "Chiara used to play it." "Your sister?" He gave one sharp nod. "She died young. Wrong place, wrong time." Alina stepped closer, the cold stone floor a shock beneath her bare feet. "Is that why you helped me?" Lucian's gaze met hers, unguarded for the first time. "Maybe," he said, his voice a low current. "Or maybe I just wanted to believe redemption still exists." The quiet tick of a clock punctuated the heavy air. Outside, the sea sighed against the rocks. When Alina spoke again, her voice was a breath. "Then keep your promise, not just to me, but to yourself." His eyes flickered, haunted by a ghost of pain. "Careful, Alina. You talk like someone who thinks I can still be saved." She held his gaze, unwavering. "I think you already started to be." The city thrummed with a restless energy, amplified by the rain. By the second night, the storm had returned, painting neon reflections across the slick harbor. Inside Club Nero, a different kind of storm brewed. Lucian's men gathered in a back corridor, cigarette smoke hanging thick as fog. "Boss is losing his edge," one muttered, the words laced with something sharper than concern. "Since when does a beggar sleep under his roof?" another sneered. "Since she cried?" Laughter, raw and cruel, followed. "He's gone sentimental." Merrick, a silent shadow, leaned against the wall. He didn't join in. His gaze, unreadable, cut through the smoke and snickers until their voices dissolved into the guilty hush that always accompanied his scrutiny. "Get back to work," he commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. When the corridor cleared, he lit a cigarette, staring at the glowing tip. "You'd better know what you're doing, Lucian," he whispered to the empty air. Upstairs, in the hushed lounge, Alina sat, her leg brace gleaming dully in the lamplight. The storm outside cast shifting patterns on the floor. She was engrossed in a forgotten newspaper, headlines screaming about missing dock workers and North Harbor raids. Lucian entered, his movements quiet, shedding his tailored jacket. His shirt sleeves were rolled, revealing the sharp lines of muscle and vein along his forearms, etched with a fatigue she hadn't noticed before. "You're awake late," he observed. "Couldn't sleep," she admitted, the thunder a distant growl. He poured himself a drink, amber liquid swirling in the glass. "You'll get used to it. The city never truly sleeps. It just pretends." Alina folded the newspaper carefully. "They talk about you in here," she said, her voice a low challenge. He arched an eyebrow. "Do they?" "Not by name, but I know who they mean. The man who owns everything but peace." A faint smirk touched his lips. "They make me sound poetic." She met his eyes, unblinking. "They make you sound dangerous." He didn't deny it. Both can be true. Meanwhile, at the docks, a sleek black car pulled up. A man emerged wearing a long coat and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Radu Petresco, Lucian's old rival. Rumors had reached him. Lucian De Rossi, the untouchable, had gone soft. Radu had built his empire waiting for cracks in other men's armor. "Find me someone inside," he told his driver, his voice a silken thread. "Someone who still remembers what loyalty costs." By dawn, the whispers had already infiltrated Club Nero. Lucian woke early, the sea outside his villa, a slate-gray canvas, waves hammering against the rocks. He found Alina in the kitchen, precariously balanced on her good leg, struggling to pour coffee. "Careful," he warned. "I can manage." She bristled, but he watched her struggle for a beat before stepping forward. Their hands brushed as he steadied the cup. She froze, a jolt running through her. "Thank you," she whispered. He looked down at her, an unreadable depth in his eyes. "You shouldn't have to thank me for that." A small, tired smile touched her lips. "Then for the first time, I won't." He almost laughed, a dry, unexpected sound. "Almost. You're bold for someone half broken." "I'm not broken," she fired back, her chin lifting. "Just delayed." The answer caught him off guard. He studied her for a moment longer, then turned to the window. "The doctor will call today. We'll start therapy next week." Alina hesitated. "You're sure you can trust him? People know who you are." Lucian's shoulders tensed, a ripple of old battles. "They know who I was." That afternoon, Merrick entered the study, his tone tight, strained. "Radu's men are sniffing around again. They say, you've gone soft." Lucian didn't look up from his papers. "Let them talk." Talk becomes action. Lucian closed the folder with a snap. "If they want war, they'll find I haven't forgotten how to fight. But this time, Merrick, it's on my terms." Merrick frowned. "And the girl?" "She stays under protection. Anyone touches her, dies." The words were delivered as simple fact, devoid of heat, and that chilled Merrick more than any shouted threat could have. Evening descended, heavy and sudden. Thunder rolled over the bay, shaking the old shutters. Alina sat near the window, her violin resting on her knee, untouched for months. Lucian entered quietly. "You play?" "I used to." She hesitated, her gaze distant. "It's not good anymore." "Then it will be honest," he said. Slowly she drew the bow across the strings. The first note emerged, wavering, fragile as breath. Then another followed, clearer, fuller. The melody rose and fell, imperfect, trembling, alive, like rain against glass. Lucian stood in the doorway, listening. For a few minutes, the house seemed to forget who he was. The air softened. Even the guards outside ceased their low murmurs. When the song ended, she looked up, embarrassed. "Sorry, I'm out of practice." He shook his head. "No. You reminded this place it's still human." Her cheeks flushed. "And you?" He smiled faintly. "Work in progress." But outside, beneath the city's hum, a different rhythm began to build. Whispers traveled through alleys and taverns. A man like Lucian showing mercy was blood in the water. Radu listened to the reports with quiet amusement. "A crippled girl changed him," he mused, a cruel glint in his eyes. "Then she'll unmake him." He poured himself a drink. "Find her." That night, sleep eluded Lucian. He stood on the balcony, a cigarette burning between his fingers, the rain sliding off the stone balustrade. Merrick's warnings replayed in his mind. He thought of Alina, the way she looked when she played, the way her voice steadied, even when she shook. The memory unsettled him more than any threat. Downstairs, the front gate creaked. A shadow moved near the wall. Lucian's hand went instinctively to the pistol under his coat. He moved silently through the hall, past the dim lamps to the reinforced door, his steps masked by the drumming rain. Outside, the air smelled of iron and storm. He saw the figure clearly now, one of his own men, bleeding, staggering toward the steps. "Boss," the man gasped, collapsing, coughing blood. They found her at the clinic." Lucian's world narrowed to the pounding of his own pulse. "Who?" "Radu's men. They're coming." The man went still. Lucian looked up at the dark horizon, at the faint red flash of lightning far over the water. For the first time in years, he felt fear. Not for himself, but for someone else. He turned toward the stairs, his voice low but sharp as he called out. His call came just after midnight. Lucian had barely reached the top of the stairs when Merrick appeared, pistol drawn, eyes hard as flint. "They hit the clinic," Merrick said, his voice flat. "2 guards down. Doctor's missing." Lucian's pulse steadied into that old, dangerous rhythm he'd sworn to forget. "And the girl?" "They took her." The words landed like a blade. The thunder outside swallowed Lucian's answer, but Merrick didn't need to hear it. He saw it in the way Lucian's jaw locked, in the quiet shift of his shoulders as he holstered his pistol and moved for the door. "Get the cars," Lucian commanded. "No lights, no sirens." The rain had turned the streets into shimmering mirrors. Tires hissed across puddles as 3 black sedans slipped through the old quarter, a silent convoy heading toward the harbor's industrial edge. Lucian rode in the front seat, eyes fixed on the horizon where lightning pulsed over the churning sea. Merrick's phone buzzed once. He listened, then said, "Warehouse 47, the old cannery." Lucian nodded. He knew it well. A rust-rotted relic his men had once used for shipments that never appeared on paper. 5 men minimum, Merrick continued. Radu's signature. Lucian checked the magazine of his gun, chambered around, and said nothing. At the cannery, the smell of salt and oil clung to the air, cloying and cold. Waves slammed against the concrete pylons below. Inside, sickly yellow floodlights flickered through broken windows. Lucian's men spread out soundlessly, black shadows against darker walls. From somewhere within came a muffled cry, small, desperate. Lucian signaled once. 2 guards slipped through a side door. Another covered the back. He moved forward alone, his boots whispering over the wet cement. The cry came again. He found her near the loading platform, bound to a chair, her violin lying shattered at her feet. One man stood behind her, another near the stairs, phone to his ear. "Tell him we've got her," the man said. "He'll come running." Lucian stepped from the shadows and fired twice. Both men fell before they could turn, the shots echoing like thunder in the hollow space. "Alina," he said quietly, crossing the floor. Her eyes fluttered open. "Lucian." He cut the ropes with a knife, pulling her up. She tried to stand, but her leg buckled. He caught her against his chest. "You came," she whispered. "Always." A shout rang out from the far door. Radu's men flooding in, rifles raised. Merrick's voice crackled over the radio. "We're inside. 30 seconds." Lucian dragged her behind a stack of crates just as gunfire ripped through the room. Splinters exploded from the wood. He returned fire in calm, measured bursts, each shot deliberate, precise. Smoke filled the air, mixing with dust and the bitter smell of gunpowder. "Stay down," he commanded, reloading. She gripped his sleeve. "You'll get killed." He glanced at her, eyes cold. "Then at least for something that matters." When Merrick's team burst through the side door, chaos followed, consuming the warehouse in a storm of shouts and gunfire. Steel shrieked against concrete, bone cracked with a sickening snap, and the sharp ring of shell casings scattering across the wet floor echoed in the cavernous space. Lucian moved with the terrifying precision of a man who had been sculpted by violence, his every strike a memory of a harsh youth. The shadow of guilt that usually cloaked him evaporated, replaced by cold, lethal efficiency. When the final body crumpled, the sudden silence was a heavier blow than any fist. Rain hissed through bullet holes in the roof, tiny geysers steaming on hot gun barrels. Lucian lowered his weapon, his hand steady until he turned. Then a single tremor ran through him as he met her gaze. "It's over," he said, the words a desperate plea against the truth. But it wasn't. From the shadows of the catwalk above, Radu emerged, a thin, predatory smile stretching his lips, a pistol glinting in his hand. "I always knew you'd trade blood for conscience, Lucian, and look where it led you." Lucian's aim snapped up, but Radu's hammer was already cocked, a metallic click echoing his chilling words. "Drop it," Radu ordered, his voice laced with triumph. Lucian didn't move, a beat stretched, taut as a wire. "You won't shoot me," Radu taunted, his eyes glittering. "You need to prove you're better than me now, remember?" Lucian's finger tightened on the trigger, the cold metal biting into his skin. "No," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "I just need to stop you." 2 shots cracked, impossibly loud in the suddenly still air. Radu stumbled, his eyes wide with disbelief, the rusted railing behind him shrieking as it gave way. He plunged into the churning darkness below, the sound swallowed by the hungry sea. For a moment, only the drumming rain existed. Lucian lowered the pistol, his chest heaving. Marich materialized through the drifting smoke, a smear of blood on his sleeve. "You all right?" Lucian nodded, his jaw tight. "Get the cars. We're leaving." He knelt, lifting Alina with a tenderness that belied the chaos. She was half-conscious, her lips moving, whispering something lost to the storm and the roar in his ears. Outside, the raw, cold air hit them. Lightning tore the sky, briefly painting the harbor in a stark, silver light. Lucian cradled her into the back seat of the car. "Drive," he commanded, his voice a low rumble. Merrick floored the accelerator, the cannery vanishing behind them, devoured by the rain. By the time they reached the villa, dawn was bleeding pale light into the bruised clouds. The doctor, summoned hours ago, was waiting. Lucian gently laid Alina on the couch, fresh blood weeping through her torn bandages. Her hand, fragile as a bird, caught his wrist. "Don't leave," she whispered, her eyelids fluttering. "You promised." Lucian brushed a wet strand of hair from her face. "I'm here," he said. "I keep my promises." Her grip softened, sleep finally claiming her. Lucian stood rooted, long after the doctor took over, his hands still trembling. He had killed again, saved again, and somewhere between those twin truths, something deep inside him had irrevocably shifted. Hours later, Merrick returned to find Lucian still by her bedside. "She'll live," the doctor's calm voice cut through the stillness, "but needs rest." Marich poured himself a drink, the clink of ice a stark sound in the quiet. "Radu's gone, his crew scattered, it's over." Lucian's gaze never left the sleeping girl. "Nothing's over. Not until I rebuild this the right way." Marich studied him, a question in his eyes. "In what way is that?" Lucian exhaled slowly, the weight of the last 20 years pressing on him. "One where people like her don't end up in our alleys." Marich almost smiled, a bitter twist of his lips. "You sound like a man who wants to be forgiven." Lucian stared out at the rising light. "Maybe I just want to be worth the saving she thinks I am." Morning broke pale over Dravnik, the city washed raw by the night's deluge. From the villa's sweeping balcony, the harbor shimmered with a dull pewter light. Lucian hadn't moved in hours, caught in the quiet hum of the espresso machine downstairs, the muffled voices of guards, and the insistent pulse of his own thoughts. Inside the guest room, Alina slept beneath crisp, clean sheets, her face colorless but peaceful. The doctor's instruments lay in precise order on the bedside table. Sterile gauze, a half-empty syringe, the sharp gleam of scissors catching the morning sun. Lucian reached to adjust her blanket, a flicker of raw tenderness in his eyes. The girl stirred, a soft, unintelligible whisper escaping her lips. He drew back, the familiar weight of years of guilt settling like stone on his chest. Every sound in the house was too loud, the creak of floorboards, the faint murmur of men who didn't yet grasp what kind of man they now served. Downstairs, Marek waited by the table, phone pressed to his ear. "Yes," he said quietly, his voice taut. "2 dead, maybe 3. Radu's body hasn't surfaced yet." He hung up, his gaze locking with Lucian's. "Harbor police are asking questions. They know someone dumped a body off Pier 12. Lucian poured black coffee, the cup rattling faintly in his hand. "They won't find it." Marek leaned forward, eyes sharp. "That's not the point. They're looking at you. You disappear from the club. Alina vanishes. Your men limp back with bullet wounds. You've been careful for 20 years, and now you're leaving footprints the size of graves." Lucian took a slow sip, the bitter taste a perfect match for his mood. "Maybe I'm done hiding." Marek slammed a palm on the table, the sharp crack echoing through the quiet house. "Then what? You think saving one girl buys you redemption? You think it brings Chiara back?" The name hung in the air between them, a strike, a wound. Lucian's eyes lifted, sharp and dangerous. "Watch your mouth." Silence stretched, long enough for the grandfather clock in the hall to tick 3 full beats. Then Lucian stood, his voice softer, laced with an unfamiliar vulnerability. "I can't change what I've done, Marek, but I can change what comes after." Marek looked away, his jaw tight. "You'll lose everything." Lucian's reply was barely a whisper. "Then maybe it's finally a fair trade." By noon, the police had reached the club. Inspectors moved through the kitchen, notebooks in hand, their questions polite but sharp as razors. Lucian stood at the bar, unarmed, answering each one with disarming calm. "Mr. De Rossi, were you at the docks last night?" "I was home." "Anyone who can confirm that?" "My staff." He gave them nothing but half-truths wrapped in civility. When they finally left, Marek exhaled through gritted teeth. "They'll be back." Lucian nodded, his gaze flat. "Then I'll be ready." At dusk, Alina woke again. The room was bathed in amber light, dust motes dancing in the golden shafts. She saw Lucian sitting nearby, head bowed, eyes lost in some distant place. "You look like you haven't slept," she murmured, her voice still weak. He looked up, a faint, tired smile touching his lips. "Neither have you." "Where's Marek?" "Handling business." His tone softened. "How do you feel?" "Alive." She hesitated. "Did you find them?" He didn't answer. That was enough. She turned her face toward the window, watching the last light fade. "You didn't have to kill for me." His jaw tightened. "That's where you're wrong. I had to." "You think violence fixes what violence broke?" Lucian rubbed a hand across his face, weary to his bones. "No, but sometimes it stops the bleeding long enough to find another way." For a while, only the faint scent of salt drifting in from the sea filled the silence. Finally, she spoke again. "Then promise me one thing." "What?" "That this ends here. No more bodies because of me." He met her gaze, his eyes dark. "If anyone touches you again, Alina, I can't promise that." Her eyes filled, but she held his stare. "Then you'll never be free." That night, Lucian sat in his office, the ledger open before him, the true heart of his empire. Every shipment, every payoff, every carefully constructed lie was contained within its pages. He took a match from the drawer, struck it, and watched the flame catch the first page. The fire crawled, orange and greedy, across the paper, smoke curling upward like the ghost of everything he had built. Merrick burst in, his eyes wide. "What are you doing? Ending it?" "Burning evidence doesn't free you, Lucian. It just leaves ash." Lucian stared into the heart of the flames. "Ash is better than blood." The book crumbled into embers. Merrick swore under his breath, turning away. Near midnight, the villa was quiet again. Alina stood on the balcony, wrapped in one of Lucian's coats, the brace on her arm glinting faintly in the moonlight. She heard his footsteps before she saw him. "You're supposed to be resting," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "I've rested enough." She looked out at the distant harbor lights. "Do you ever think about leaving this place?" "Every day," he replied, a shrug in his voice. "The city doesn't let go easily." She faced him, her eyes searching his. "Maybe it's not the city holding you." He almost smiled, a ghost of humor. "You think you know me already? I think I see who you could be." The breeze lifted her hair, carrying the lingering scent of rain. He watched her for a long moment, then said quietly, "Tomorrow I'll move you somewhere safe. After that, we'll see." Safe from who? From the world I made. When he left her there, she leaned on the railing, the cool night air pressing soft against her skin. Somewhere far below, waves met stone in a slow, steady rhythm, like a heartbeat. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe she might have a future. And inside the house, Lucian sat alone, the burned ledger still smoking in the sink. The scent of paper and fire clung to the air, to his clothes. He whispered to no one, "Tomorrow it changes." The morning came heavy, thick with too much silence. The villa faintly smelled of smoke and salt. Downstairs, men whispered in the hallway, uneasy, hushed. They had seen the fire in the office last night. They knew their world was shifting, and none of them liked it. Lucian stepped into the corridor, sleeves rolled up, tie gone. His eyes were red-rimmed, but steady. "Where's Merrick?" he asked. "In the garage, boss," one of the guards replied. Lucian nodded. "Get the car ready. We're going to the docks." The guard hesitated, a question in his eyes. "The docks? After last night?" Lucian's stare killed the question before it formed. "You heard me." Merrick was by the SUV, a cigarette dangling loose from his lips. When Lucian approached, he didn't look up, only puffed out a stream of smoke. "You're serious about this?" Lucian leaned against the car, the metal cool beneath his hand. "Every account, every shell company. Shut them down. Tell the accountants to disappear." "That's suicide," Merrick said flatly, finally looking at him. "You pull the money out, half the city comes for you." Lucian's voice was low, laced with iron. "Then they can come." Merrick snorted a humorless laugh. "You're not saving her anymore, Lucian. You're trying to save yourself. And this," he gestured at the car, the sprawling city, the sea beyond, "isn't how men like us get saved." Lucian met his gaze. "Maybe I stopped being a man like us." For a long second, Merrick simply studied him, his oldest friend, the man who had built empires out of fear. Then he crushed the cigarette under his boot. "Fine," Merrick said, his voice flat. "But when this falls apart, don't expect me to pick up the pieces." Lucian's answer was simple. "You already have." The drive through the industrial district was quiet, the warehouses looming like silent gray ghosts. Lucian watched the blurred skyline, the edges of his old life dissolving into the morning mist. The stark gray cranes, skeletal against the bruised sky, watched over the rusting ships. Here, in the acrid perfume of oil and rain, Lucian had forged his empire. Now he was dismantling it, one calculated lie at a time. At the docks, two men, brokers who had once been allies, now circling like vultures, stiffened as Lucian emerged from the car. "Mr. De Rossi," one began, his voice oily. "We heard rumors. Is it true you're divesting your shares?" Lucian's gaze, unwavering, cut through the salt spray. "All of them." The men exchanged a quick, unsettled glance. "That's unexpected." "Then don't expect it," Lucian replied, the words clipped. "Just take the offer." They nodded, too eager, too quick. In this world, a moment's hesitation could kill faster than any bullet. Back at the villa, Alina sat on the balcony. The worn notebook, salvaged from the study, lay open on her lap, a nascent sketch of the view blossoming on its page. Her bandages were fresh, her skin held a fragile blush of health, yet her eyes held a vast, unsettling distance, the kind that came from seeing too much, too soon. Lucian entered, shrugging off his coat onto a chair. "You went out again." "Business," he said, the word heavy. Her lips thinned. "You say that as if it explains everything." "It used to," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "Now it doesn't." She tilted her head, a flicker of something unreadable in her gaze. "Then why keep doing it?" He offered no answer. Instead, he simply sat across from her, his eyes falling on the notebook. The sketch was rough, yet alive with the pulse of the sea, the intricate geometry of rooftops, the phantom whisper of gulls. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You draw?" "I used to paint," she murmured, her voice thin. "Before Mama got sick." "Before the rent collectors came," Lucian nodded, the memory a dull ache. "I remember men like that." "You were one of them," she said softly, her eyes holding his. He didn't deny it. Later that night, Marich returned, a shadow in his eyes Lucian hadn't glimpsed in years. Fear. "You need to see this," he said, a crumpled newspaper landing on the desk with a thud. The headline screamed, "Police investigate alleged mafia power shift. Internal war feared." Lucian's jaw tightened as he scanned the text. His name wasn't explicitly named, but the euphemisms, a long-standing figure in the Southern trade, spoke volumes. Someone had talked. "Who leaked this?" Lucian's voice was a low growl. "Could be anyone." Marich shrugged, sweat beading on his brow. "Half the lieutenants are restless. You cut off the money, they panic." Lucian's voice turned to ice. "Then we find out who." By dawn, the identity of the informant was painfully clear. Enzo Varga, a mid-level man, loyal for years until loyalty stopped paying. Marich's men dragged him from the back of a shuttered nightclub, rain plastering his hair to his face. Lucian watched, silent as a wraith. "Please," Enzo gasped, his breath hitching. "I didn't mean to. I just needed." Lucian raised a hand, and the pleading died. He stepped closer, each movement deliberate, a predator stalking its prey. "You sold names to the police. You risked everything we built." "I had no choice," Enzo cried, desperation in his eyes. "You're tearing it all down. I have a family." Lucian stared at him, the word family twisting like a knife in his gut. Without looking at Marich, he simply said, "Let him go." Marich blinked, disbelief etched on his face. "What?" I said, "Let him go." Enzo's breath hitched again, but this time with a fragile hope. "You mean—" Lucian turned away, his voice flat. "Get out of the city by morning. If I see you again, I won't be so generous." Enzo nodded frantically, stumbling away into the downpour. When the heavy silence returned, Marich stepped forward. "You're making mistakes, Lucian." "Big ones," Lucian agreed, his voice devoid of emotion. "I've made worse." That night, the lights flickered and died across half the compound. Lucian knew what it meant even before Marich burst through the door, his face grim. "Inside job! They're coming! Our own men!" Lucian stood, holstering his gun with a practiced hand. "Then we end it." Outside, lightning tore the sky apart, illuminating the churning bay. Shadows danced between the olive trees, his former soldiers, his very creation, now moving to devour him. He turned to Marich, his voice calm amidst the gathering storm. "Get her out." Marich shook his head, defiance in his eyes. "Not without you." "You owe me nothing," Lucian said, his voice firm, "but you owe her a chance." Then he was gone, moving down the long hall, a silhouette against the flashes of lightning, towards the main doors where darkness waited. Inside, the old house awoke with a symphony of echoes. Footsteps, hushed whispers, the metallic click of rifles being loaded. In the foyer, Lucian stood, hand steady on his pistol, rain dripping from his coat. The scent of fear thick in the air. He could hear them closing in. His empire had come full circle. Now it was time to decide what kind of man would emerge from the fire. A faint, cold smile played on his lips. Let's finish this. The first shot shattered the villa's stillness just past 2 a.m. Glass exploded across the marble floor, scattering like broken stars. Lucian dropped instantly behind the doorway, hand already on his pistol. "Marek!" he yelled, but there was no answer, only the heavy thud of boots in the courtyard and the stutter of automatic fire. Rain lashed the olive trees outside, and lightning revealed dark figures scaling the outer wall. Men he had once paid, men who knew every hidden entry. Betrayal, after all, always wore the face of familiarity. He moved through the hall, low and fast, his ears parsing every sound. 3 near the east balcony, 2 by the service door, 1 heavy set of footsteps on the stairs, dangerously close. He swung around the corner and fired once. A body hit the wall, sliding silently to the ground. The smell of cordite filled the air, acrid and metallic. Upstairs, Alina woke to a maelstrom of gunfire and shouts, the taste of dust clinging to her tongue. She tried to sit up, a searing pain lancing through her leg. Marek burst into the room, his face streaked with blood and rain. "Come on," he urged, pulling back the blanket. "We've got to move." "What's happening?" "Mutiny." Half the crew turned. He hoisted her up, ignoring her protests, slinging her arm over his shoulder. "Lucian's buying us time. Back exit through the wine cellar. Keep your head down." They moved as quickly as they could down the narrow staircase, the distant gunfire echoing through the stone. Alina's heart hammered, her breath shallow. The air was heavy with damp earth and spilled wine. "Where is he?" she gasped. "Doing what he always does," Marek muttered grimly. "Fighting alone." Lucian crouched behind an overturned table in the main hall, reloading by feel. The grand chandelier above swayed precariously, its crystals tinkling faintly, a ghost of past elegance. 2 men burst through the patio doors. Lucian fired once, then twice. Both dropped. He ducked as bullets tore through the walls behind him, his ears ringing. Somewhere above, plaster rained down. He heard swift, light footsteps, and then Marek's voice, a lifeline from the stairwell. "Boss!" Lucian spun, relief a sharp blade through the adrenaline. "She's safe, headed for the cellar." Lucian nodded. "Good. Then we hold here." They fell into a rhythm, born of years of fighting side by side, one covering, one firing, shifting positions by instinct. The air stank of smoke and rain. Every flash of lightning outside threw the room into violent, fractured motion. Crumbling walls, dancing shadows, faces glimpsed in a terrifying strobe. "Why are they doing this?" Marek shouted over the din. Lucian didn't look. "Because I told them I was done, and they believed me." The fight stretched, minutes bleeding into hours. The heavy front door finally gave way under a brutal shoulder slam, and 6 more men poured in. Marek emptied a clip, ducked behind a pillar, reloaded. Lucian felt the searing burn of a graze along his arm, but ignored it. Pain was an old language, his body fluent in its grammar. He hurled a smoke grenade toward the foyer. The explosion filled the air with a thick gray veil. He and Marek slipped through it, flanking the attackers. When the smoke cleared, 5 more bodies lay still. Only the storm remained to speak its thunderous monologue. In the cellar, Alina and one of the house guards reached the outer tunnel that snaked towards the cliffs. The passage smelled of salt and decay, the stones slick underfoot. She limped forward, clutching the guard's sleeve. Above, the muffled gunfire resonated like thunder underwater. "Keep moving," the guard urged. "Once we reach the rocks, there's a path down to the boats." But before they reached the exit, a new shadow filled the tunnel mouth. A tall man, rifle raised, not one of Lucian's. The guard shoved Alina aside and fired. The echo deafened her. The stranger fell, but not before his own shot slammed into the guard's chest. He dropped, wordless, eyes wide and unseeing. Alina crawled to him, blood already pooling beneath his back. No, no, stay with me. He smiled faintly, a ghost of an expression. Go, tell him. The words died, unfinished. Her hands shaking, Alina took his pistol, stood, and limped into the rain-soaked night. Inside, Lucian and Marek were cornered near the dining room, bullets shredding the doorway. Marek reloaded with a feral growl. We're running out of rounds. Lucian checked his own magazine. Half left. Then we make them count. The next volley came fast and furious. Marek leaned out, fired, then ducked back. Too late. A shot caught him in the side. He fell against the wall, breath ragged. Lucian dragged him behind the counter, pressing a hand over the wound. Blood seeped through his fingers. Stay with me, Lucian commanded. Marek's laugh was a rasp. Told you it would end like this. Not tonight. But even as he said it, Lucian saw the color draining from his friend's face. Marek, go, Marek whispered, his voice fading. She's still out there. Don't waste it. Another burst of gunfire tore through the room. Lucian grabbed his weapon, a cold rage coiling in his gut, and stood. He walked into the open, firing without hesitation. Every shot found its mark, years of violence guiding his hands like muscle memory. By the time his magazine clicked empty, the last man had fallen. The house was silent again, save for the storm outside. Lucian turned back to Marek. Too late. He knelt beside him, fingers brushing the still warm hand. You stubborn bastard, he murmured. For a long time he stayed there, rain dripping from the shattered roof above. Then he stood, holstered his pistol, and started toward the cellar. Outside, near the cliffs, lightning revealed Alina struggling along the precarious path, waves crashing far below. She turned at the sound of boots on stone. Lucian emerged from the tunnel, bloodied, limping slightly, his eyes blazing. When he saw her, relief flickered for a fraction of a second, quickly buried beneath exhaustion. You're hurt, she said. So are you. They both gave a short, broken laugh. Half sobbed, a sound shredded raw, born of spirits finally broken and fear burned to ash. He reached her side, his hand finding the small of her back as the wind howled like a banshee released. It's over, he uttered, the lie tasting like rust on his tongue. Neither of them believed it for a second. Behind them, the villa, his gilded cage, tore itself apart in an inferno. Flames lashed out, painting the rain-streaked darkness in strokes of hellish gold. Everything he'd built, his empire, his name, the very air he breathed, vanished in a spectacle of fire and smoke. Alina watched, a tremor running through her. What happens now? She asked, her voice thin. Lucian's gaze lingered on the conflagration, a grim farewell. Now, he replied, the word a promise and a burden, we start over. The wind, a ghost itself, carried the scent of salt and ash down the sheer cliffs. Far below, a new sound began to tear through the night, the distant rising wail of sirens. Lucian didn't look back. He simply took her hand, and together they dissolved into the impenetrable darkness beyond the winding road. The villa continued its defiant blaze through the long night, its unholy glow staining the bruised horizon long after Lucian and Alina had melted into the hills. By dawn, the fire was nothing but a skeletal memory, a heap of smoldering embers, yet the city below was already alive with whispers, the fall of the Daci Empire. The ghost of a king vanished. Lucian drove an old black Alpha, its engine a low growl, along a narrow coastal road that snaked through stands of ancient pine and jagged rock. The rain had ceased, leaving the air heavy and metallic, tasting of sea and earth. Alina sat beside him, swallowed in the borrowed warmth of his coat, her eyes finally closed. Exhaustion, a patient predator, had dragged her under. Every mile they put between themselves and the burning villa felt like a liberation and a deeper loss. He'd shed everything, the illicit fortunes, the loyal men, even the silent stone marking Marek's grave. Only the pistol, a cold comfort on the seat beside him, remained. He couldn't tell if it made him safer or simply extended his curse. The road narrowed further. A faded sign, weathered by coastal storms, announced, Saint Venera 3, Killam. Lucian slowed the car. The village was a watercolor sketch, a handful of fishermen's cottages, a stoic church, a solitary market, and a cafe that still exhaled wood smoke from old coal stoves, the kind of place where people knew their own ghosts and minded them. He pulled the Alpha alongside a boarded-up guest house and cut the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. "Where are we?" Alina murmured, surfacing slowly from sleep. "Somewhere they won't look," he answered, his voice a low rumble. Inside, the guest house hung heavy with the smell of dust and forgotten salt. The owner, an old woman whose eyes were sharp as polished glass, asked no questions. She simply slid a tarnished key across the counter, her gaze a silent judgment, and nodded towards the stairs. "Cash only," she stated, her voice as dry as the air. Lucian dropped a thick wad of euros onto the worn counter. "We were never here." She pocketed the money without a flicker of expression. "You weren't." Their room upstairs was small. Cracks spiraled across the plaster, and the tattered curtains clung precariously to the rods. But a comforting warmth emanated from the ancient iron heater, and for now, that was enough. Lucian gently helped Alina to the narrow bed. She winced, a brief flash of pain across her face, but said nothing. "You need rest," he said, his voice softer than she'd heard in years. "I need answers," she countered, her voice just above a whisper. He sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing a hand across the stubble on his jaw. "What kind?" "You said we'd start over." Her eyes, dark pools in the dim light, fixed on him. "What does that mean?" Lucian's gaze drifted to the window, to the endless gray expanse of the sea beyond. "It means I stopped pretending redemption is something a man can buy." She studied him, her expression unreadable. "And if it's something you have to earn?" He offered a faint, humorless ghost of a smile. "Then I've got a long road ahead." That night, Lucian dreamt of fire again. Not the villa, but older, more corrosive fires. A warehouse in Naples, gutted and smoking. A man screaming, a terrible sound that clawed at his throat. Merrick's voice, raw with desperation, shouting his name through a haze of smoke. He woke in the suffocating dark, a sheen of cold sweat on his back. Alina stirred beside him. "Lucian, go back to sleep," he urged, his voice rough. But she sat up anyway, her presence a soft weight in the darkness. "You still hear it, don't you?" He didn't answer. She reached out, her fingers brushing his arm, a feather-light touch. "You can't fight ghosts with bullets." He drew a slow, deliberate breath. "I don't fight them," he said softly. "I just try to keep them quiet." Morning came, swathed in a fog so thick it swallowed the sea whole. Lucian walked to the village cafe, his hood pulled low, eyes instinctively scanning the street, a habit burned deep into his bones. He bought coffee and a fresh loaf of bread, paid in cash, and slipped out before anyone could even begin to wonder who he was. When he returned, Alina sat by the window, sketching again. Her pencil moved across the paper, depicting the craggy cliffs, the wisps of smoke clinging to the distant hills, the boundless gray horizon. "You draw the world like it's still worth saving," he observed. "Maybe it is," she replied, without looking up. "You just have to look from the right angle." He offered a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You sound like Merrick." A beat of silence. "Was he the one who saved you?" she asked, her voice gentle. Lucian paused, the memory a bitter taste. "No, he was the one who tried." By afternoon, the delicate peace shattered. 2 black sedans, like dark beetles, appeared at the far end of the coastal road. Lucian saw them first, a flicker of dark glass, no license plates, through the grimy window. Old instincts, dormant but not dead, flared awake. He turned to Alina, his voice sharp and urgent. "Pack your things. Now." Her pencil froze mid-stroke. "What's wrong?" "They found us." He grabbed his pistol from under the bed, checked the clip. Alina, her movements swift and practiced, stuffed her sketches and a handful of clothes into a satchel. They moved through the back door, down a narrow, shadowed alley that snaked into the ancient churchyard. Behind them, engines cut, doors slammed with menacing thuds, voices, clipped and distant, shouted orders. Men fanned out. Lucian led her through the swirling fog, past weathered headstones, towards the cliffs beyond the cemetery. With every pounding step, the roar of the sea grew louder, a hungry beast. "How long can we keep running?" she whispered, her breath ragged. "As long as it takes." Then he stopped, and Lucian didn't look back. Then we stopped running. At the very edge of the precipice, an abandoned chapel stood like a crumbling sentinel, its roof half collapsed, ancient ivy crawling over its stone bones. Lucian pulled her inside. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of salt, dust, and forgotten prayers. He crouched near the doorway, listening. They were close now, boots crunching gravel, the faint, metallic hum of radios. "Lucian," Alina said, her voice quiet but firm. "You can't keep doing this." He looked at her, her face pale and trembling, yet an undeniable defiance burned in her eyes. "Doing what?" "Saving me," she answered, her gaze unwavering. "Like it's the only thing keeping you human." His mouth tightened into a grim line. "It's the only thing left I know how to do." She took a step closer. "Then learn something else." The words hit harder than any bullet, finding their mark. He looked away, his jaw flexing. Outside, a voice, amplified by the fog, echoed across the cliffs. "Lucian De Rossi, you can't hide forever." Lucian stood slowly, the pistol a cold, familiar weight in his hand. "No," he murmured, his voice a low thrum of steel. "But I can finish what I started." He turned to Alina. "Stay here." "Lucian," I said. Before she could finish, he was gone, a phantom dissolving into the mist, moving towards the voices. He moved low, a shadow amongst shadows, the sheer cliffs a dark wall to his right, the raw scent of seaweed and rust filling his lungs. He could make out their outlines now, 6 men, armed, cautious, their movements betraying a calculated arrogance. They expected fear. What they found instead was a chilling resolve. Lucian fired first. The shot cracked like thunder across the cliffs, echoing into the churning sea. 2 men dropped instantly, their surprised shouts cut short. The others scrambled for cover, shouting orders that dissolved in the wind's hungry maw. The fight was quick, brutal, over in a handful of seconds. When silence returned, heavy and absolute, Lucian stood alone among the bodies, breathing hard, the adrenaline coursing through him. He lowered the pistol, its weight suddenly unbearable, a leaden burden in his hand. The fog thinned, a momentary clearing, revealing the chapel again. Alina stood in the doorway, her eyes wide, her face terribly pale. He met her gaze, and then, for the first time, he said what he had never admitted to her, to Merrick, or even to himself. "I don't want to be this man anymore." She walked towards him slowly, her limp still visible, but her steps steady, resolute. "Then don't be." Lucian stared at the gun in his hand, then at the churning gray sea. Without a word, he threw the weapon. It vanished with a faint, almost delicate splash, swallowed by the insatiable water below. For the first time in what felt like forever, the silence that followed felt clean. They stood there, side by side, the wind playfully lifting her dark hair, the world of his past burning itself out behind them. What came next was an open question, maybe freedom, maybe ruin. But for once, Lucian wasn't running from either. He looked at her, his voice softer than the sea breeze. "Let's go home." 3 days after the cliffs, the headlines exploded. Interpol issues warrant for Lucian De Rossi, suspected mafia boss alive. Lucian read the paper from the corner table of a small cafe in Split, the bitter espresso untouched. The photo was granular, years old, but the name was enough. Every border, every port, every police channel would be watching now. Across from him, Alina methodically tore a croissant into small, nervous pieces. "You can't keep hiding in plain sight," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the clatter of mourning. "I'm not hiding," Lucian countered, folding the paper with unnerving calm. "I'm breathing." She looked at him over the rim of her cup, her eyes dark and knowing. "Breathing doesn't mean living." He carefully slid the newspaper under the ashtray. "Then what does?" "Stopping," she said simply. "Turning yourself in, ending it before they end you." He almost smiled, a ghost of his old self. "You think prison redeems men like me? I think running kills you slower." By noon, the narrow streets buzzed with heat. The sea shimmered a vivid turquoise beyond the promenade, a false paradise where tourists laughed and vendors shouted, as if the world had forgotten violence even existed. Lucian and Alina moved through it like ghosts. They rented a single-room flat above a laundromat, the paint peeling, pipes clanging whenever someone showered below. Lucian spent hours at the grimy window, watching police cars crawl past, counting how long before one finally stopped. Each night the fire returned to his dreams. Merrick's face, the villa collapsing in a shower of red light, the faint, almost silent splash of his own gun hitting the sea. When he woke, Alina was usually by the window, sketching the dawn. Her papers filled with quiet scenes, rooftops, gulls wheeling, his hands. Once he asked, "Why draw me?" "Because you don't look like a criminal when you're asleep." 2 weeks later, the knock came. Not the pounding of hunters, but a polite, deliberate rhythm. Lucian froze, his hand instinctively reaching for the pistol he no longer possessed. The sound came again. Alina, moving before he could stop her, opened the door. A man stood there, tall in a gray overcoat, the kind police wear when they don't want to look like police. "Lucian De Rossi." Lucian's silence was answer enough. The man produced an ID. "Inspector Nikola Vidic, Organized Crime Division." "You've been hard to find," the inspector said calmly, his eyes assessing. "Mind if we talk?" Lucian's shoulders relaxed fractionally. "If you came to arrest me, you wouldn't have knocked." "True," Vidic conceded, a faint upturn at the corner of his lips. "I came for something else." They sat at the small kitchen table. The inspector's eyes drifted around the sparse flat, the stack of Alina's sketches, the single suitcase, the half-empty bottle of cheap brandy. "You could have run farther," Vidic observed, his voice deceptively casual. "Montenegro, maybe Turkey. Instead, you stop here." "Why?" Lucian answered without looking at him, his gaze fixed on the peeling paint of the wall. "You don't outrun who you are." Vidic nodded slowly, a shrewd glint in his eye. "Good, because you can't." He slid a file across the table. Inside were photographs, men in expensive suits, official documents stamped in stark red, accounts frozen, names crossed out. "Your organization's done," Vidic stated, his voice flat, "but someone's still moving shipments under your code, and whoever's left, they're killing civilians. You want to make things right?" Lucian's jaw hardened, almost imperceptibly. "Tell me who they are. In exchange, I keep you breathing long enough to testify." Alina's breath hitched. "You'd really trust them?" Lucian stared at the closed file on the table, a thick, pale stack of lives reduced to paper. He closed it gently, the soft click echoing in the sudden silence. "Give me 24 hours. Vidic, a man whose patience was a weapon, stood slowly. "You've got 12. When Vidic left, the small apartment seemed to shrink around them. The only sound was the insistent, slow drip of a faucet. Night fell, thick and windless, swallowing the city in an inky blanket. Lucian moved with a quiet efficiency, packing the sparse remnants of their life, a wad of cash, a folded street map, the small tarnished silver crucifix that had belonged to his mother. Alina watched, pale and still. "You're leaving," her eyes said. "I'm ending it," his replied. "Going back?" He met her gaze, unflinching. "If I don't, they'll keep hunting everyone who ever stood near me. That includes you." Tears shimmered, but she didn't argue. "Then I'm coming with you." "No, Alina." He crossed the room in 2 strides, his hands coming to rest gently on her shoulders. You gave me something I didn't deserve, a chance to feel human again. Don't take it back by dying next to me. She swallowed hard, her voice a raw whisper. Where will you go, Zadar? The old dockyards. The last men who still use my name will be there. She reached into her worn sketchbook, tore a page from its spine, and pressed it into his hand. It was a pencil drawing of him, standing by the sea, the wind whipping his coat. So you don't forget what you're fighting for. He folded the drawing with a reverence that belied his rough hands, slipping it into his jacket pocket. I won't. He left before dawn, the streets hushed and empty save for the spectral figures of early fishermen and scuttling stray dogs. The sun fractured the mist in thin, exploratory lines of gold, painting the road ahead like a reluctant promise. Alina stood at the window, watching his Alfa Romeo disappear beyond the curve, her lips moving soundlessly. Not a prayer, not exactly, but something close. Under the cold light of dawn, the old port reeked of diesel and salt. Gulls wheeled overhead like restless white ghosts, their cries carrying on the wind. Lucian parked behind a row of rusting shipping containers and sat for a long minute, hands gripping the wheel, not moving. He could hear the creak of the docks, the dull clang of chains in the distance, and beneath it all, the steady, deliberate beat of his own pulse. Ready. He stepped out, turning his collar against the sharp wind. This dockyard had once been his. Every crane, every shifting crate, every shadow had moved by his unspoken command. Now it felt foreign, occupied by strangers who used his name like a curse. Two men waited near the warehouse doors. They straightened almost imperceptibly when they saw him. Uncertainty flickered in their eyes, quickly masked by a practiced stoicism. Boss? One ventured, his voice a cautious murmur. Lucian stopped a few paces away, his gaze unwavering. You don't call me that anymore. The younger one shifted his weight, his eyes darting. We didn't know if the rumors were true. They are, Lucian said, his voice flat. Radu's dead. Marich is gone. The house burned. Whatever's left of this family ends here. The older man hesitated, then spoke, a thin thread of desperation in his tone. If we walk away, someone else fills the space. Lucian's voice dropped, edged with steel. Then let them. Better men or worse, it doesn't matter. I'm finished. He turned to leave, but a shout, sharp and urgent, cut through the wind. He's here! A group of men materialized from behind the stacks of crates, their rifles raised, their faces eerily familiar. His own lieutenants. Betrayal again, but colder this time, stripped of any pretense. Their leader stepped forward, Thomas Ilv, a jagged scar bisecting his cheek. He'd been one of Merrick's old recruits, a wolf cub raised in the shadows. You sold us out, Thomas said, resentment raw in his voice. Police, fire, all of it. You burned the name. Lucian didn't reach for the weapon he didn't have. You think this name ever saved you? It changed you. Thomas spat on the ground. We built this for you, and it cost every soul that touched it. The standoff stretched, a breath held taut between two worlds. Then a voice, calm and commanding, echoed from the far end of the pier. Put the guns down. Inspector Vidic emerged from the swirling fog, his coat billowing around him, a pistol held steady in his hand. Nobody wins if we start another war. Thomas snarled, his gaze flicking to Lucian. You brought cops here, boss? Lucian didn't move a muscle. He followed me. Vidic's eyes never left Thomas. Drop it. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then Thomas, with a sudden, desperate movement, swung his rifle toward Vidic. Lucian moved first. The shot cracked, deafening, across the pier. Thomas staggered backward, surprise freezing his features before he crumpled to the ground. Silence descended again, broken only by the rhythmic slap of waves against the pylons. The other men hesitated, then slowly lowered their weapons. Lucian exhaled, a long, weary breath. Go home, he said, his voice quiet, yet resonant. There's nothing left worth dying for. They scattered, dissolving into the mist, shadows swallowed by the rising sun. Vidic approached, his gun now lowered, though still held loosely. You didn't have to kill him. Lucian looked at Thomas's still form. If I hadn't, you'd be the one bleeding. That's not justice, Vidic said, his tone low. It's mercy, Lucian replied, turning toward the vast, indifferent sea. The horizon was turning molten gold, waves catching the light like shattered glass. Vidic holstered his weapon. Ready to make it official? Lucian nodded once. No more running. The interrogation room in Split smelled of stale coffee and cold metal. Lucian sat across from Vidic, his wrists cuffed loosely, a single recorder between them, its red eye blinking. Outside the window, rain traced thin, melancholic lines down the glass. State your name, Vidic said. Lucian De Rossi. Occupation? Lucian's lips curved, a ghost of a smile. Former criminal, currently unemployed. Vidic almost, but not quite, smiled back. Let's start with the fire. Lucian talked for hours, his voice a steady, measured cadence. He spoke of the ports, the shipments, the years spent buying silence with blood. He didn't embellish. He didn't excuse. Every word was a brick laid for his own tomb. When he finished, the tape clicked off. Vidic leaned back, studying him. You realize this confession puts you away for life. Lucian nodded. I wasn't planning on vacations. What about the girl? Vidic asked, his gaze sharp. Lucian looked up, his tone hardening. She's not part of this. She'll be questioned. She didn't know who I was until it was too late, Lucian said, his eyes meeting Vidic's. If you want a witness, you've got me. Vidic studied him for a long moment, a strange calculation in his eyes. You sound like a man who finally believes in consequences. Lucian's voice softened, the weary resignation of years etched into each syllable. I just stopped believing in escape. 3 days later, the headlines screamed a new narrative. Mafia boss surrenders, testifies against remaining syndicates. The city buzzed, disbelief mingling with outrage and a grudging awe. Some called him coward, others savior. Lucian read none of it. His world had shrunk to a 6x8 cell, the only constant, the distant echo of the sea beyond the prison walls. Each evening, he sat by the barred window, tracing the horizon with his eyes. In the faint, melancholic whisper of the wind, he could almost imagine a violin's melody, Alina's song carried by memory. One afternoon, a guard appeared with an envelope. No return address, just a small sketch inside. The same drawing she'd given him, now rendered in ink. Him by the sea, but this time, the gun was gone. At the bottom, 2 words, in a familiar, elegant script. You kept your promise. He folded the paper carefully, placed it on the concrete ledge, and closed his eyes. For the first time in years, Lucian De Rossi slept without dreaming of fire. The courtroom smelled of wood polish and the lingering scent of rain. Morning light streamed through the tall windows, soft and cold, glinting off the handcuffs on Lucian's wrists. Rows of journalists filled the benches, their pens poised like weapons. The fall of a king, after all, was good business. He sat at the defense table in a plain gray suit prison issued, but pressed with a strange dignity. His hair had gone silver at the temples, and he looked older than his years, a man who had already lived too many lifetimes. The prosecutor read the charges: racketeering, extortion, conspiracy, manslaughter. Each word dropped into the silence like a stone into deep water. When she finished, the judge looked down over his half-moon glasses. Do you understand the charges, Mr. De Rossi? Lucian nodded once. I do. Do you wish to make a statement before we begin? Lucian's lawyer touched his arm, a silent warning. But Lucian rose anyway. I do. The room shifted, a collective intake of breath. He spoke simply, without notes, his voice clear. For 20 years, I built something I thought was strength. It wasn't. It was fear wearing an expensive suit. Every coin I made came from someone else's pain. I used loyalty like a chain, friendship like currency. He paused, scanning the faces in the gallery, faces that would never truly understand. When it finally broke, I saw what was left. Ash. And a woman who reminded me I used to be human. I don't ask this court for mercy. I ask it to remember the people I hurt before it writes my name in another headline. He sat. The judge watched him for a long moment, then nodded to the clerk. Proceed. The trial lasted weeks. Witnesses came and went. Former lieutenants, accountants, dock workers. Each tried to carve their piece of absolution from his story. Lucian listened without reaction, hands folded, eyes steady. When Alina Petrova was called, the room went still. She walked to the stand on her own, the brace gone now, a faint scar visible at her temple. Her voice trembled only once, taking the oath. Miss Petrova, the prosecutor began, her tone sharp. You met the defendant under unusual circumstances. Would you describe them? Alina took a steadying breath. I met him the night my mother died. I thought he was a monster. She looked toward Lucian, their eyes meeting briefly, a silent exchange that transcended the courtroom. And now I think he's a man who finally stopped being one. A murmur rippled through the courtroom, quickly gavelled silent. The prosecutor pressed on. Do you believe he deserves leniency? Alina hesitated, her gaze sweeping the room. I believe justice matters, but so does change. The judge banged the gavel lightly. That will be enough. As she stepped down, Lucian's eyes followed her, not pleading, not possessive, just profoundly grateful. When the verdict came, the rain had started again, tapping gently on the tall windows. On all counts, the judge said, his voice echoing, this court finds the defendant guilty. No one breathed. But in light of his cooperation, testimony, and the lives saved by his confessions, this court also recognizes extraordinary circumstances. Lucian's pulse slowed. He heard every word clearly, though his body felt distant, hollow. 25 years, with possibility of parole in 10. Gasps rose from the press bench. Some shouted that it was too light, others that it was justice. Lucian simply bowed his head. For the first time, the sound of chains closing around his wrists didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace. Prison changed, as all things do, with time. The years passed quietly. He read more than he spoke, working in the library, mending books, learning to fix their broken bindings. The other inmates called him Old Man Rossi, half in respect, half in disbelief. Letters came occasionally, from lawyers, journalists, strangers seeking confessions. Most went unanswered. The only envelope he kept was tucked into the drawer beside his bed. Elena's. Her script, once wild, had settled into a steady hand. I opened a small clinic in Zadar, it read. The children draw you in the margins of their notebooks, not as a criminal, but as the man who saved someone. Maybe one day that's how you'll see yourself too. He never wrote back, but each letter she sent found its place, neatly stacked beneath his pillow, their corners worn soft by time. 10 years to the day after his sentencing, a guard's shadow fell across his cell. De Rossi, the voice rumbled. Pack your things. Lucian looked up slowly, a flicker in eyes that had seen too much darkness. Parole, the guard confirmed, a slight nod. You earned it. Lucian folded his few possessions, a worn copy of Les Miserables, a rosary, Elena's letters, into a small bag. Stepping through the gates, the air hit him, tasting of rain and salt. The same sea he'd once ruled now whispered like forgiveness. No one waited. He hadn't expected them to. He began to walk, each step deliberate, under a sky wide and clean. At dusk he reached the cliffs beyond Zadar, the very precipice where the fire had consumed his old life. The wind tore at his coat. Gulls cried an ancient lament overhead. A figure stood by the railing, hair dark, a coat flapping like a banner in the gale. She turned at the sound of his approach. Elena. For a long moment, only the wind spoke. The years had softened the sharp edges of her face, but her eyes held the same unwavering light. You're free, she said, her voice a quiet current against the roar of the sea. He offered a faint smile. freedom's a strange word. Maybe, she conceded, but you earned it. Lucian gazed at the horizon, where the sun bled into the water. The sea's the same, he mused. Only I changed. Elena stepped closer, her shoulder brushing his. That's enough. They stood, silhouetted against the day's last gold, not saints nor sinners, but survivors of a story finally run to ground. The sea stirred before the sun, a low silver light painting the horizon, touching Zadar's rooftops, spilling into narrow alleys still slick with rain. Lucian stood on the small apartment balcony overlooking the harbor, coffee cooling in his hand. Below, the world was a hushed tableau. Fishermen untangling nets, the hiss of salt air through drying lines, the soft hum of a city that had forgotten his name. For the first time, he felt unwatched. No guards, no gunmen, no ghosts lurking in the shadows of memory. Just the rhythmic sigh of waves and the whispers of wind. From inside, Elena's voice drifted, "Breakfast will get cold." He turned. She stood by the table, hair loose, in a sweater far too big. The small apartment smelled of fresh bread and oranges. Not luxury, but peace. "You're up early," he noted. "Couldn't sleep." He smiled, a genuine curve of his lips. "That used to mean danger. Now it just means I make too much coffee." They ate in comfortable silence, gulls screaming over the boats as sunlight broke fully across the water. When she finished, Elena leaned onto her elbows. "Clinic opens at 9. You'll come today." Lucian hesitated. "You really think anyone wants an ex-convict around sick children?" She met his gaze. "They don't see that. They see the man who built the new wing last month, who fixed the generator when it failed." He looked at his hands, calloused, scarred, yet steady. "You could have left me." "I didn't save you," she countered. "You saved yourself the day you stopped running." He nodded slowly, the words sinking in like warmth into old bones. By mid-morning, they walked through the old town, market stalls overflowing with olives, tomatoes, and cheap perfumes. The air tasted of seaweed and diesel. People moved past, seeing just another couple living an ordinary life. At the clinic, children's laughter spilled from open windows, the building small, clean, painted the color of sand. Nurses moved with quiet efficiency. Elena led Lucian to a back room, stacked high with boxes. "Supplies for the outreach trip tomorrow," she explained. "You'll drive." He grinned. "Still giving orders, I see." "Someone has to." He helped her lift boxes, feeling an old strength return, not the kind born of violence, but of purpose. A small boy peeked around the doorway, clutching a toy car. Lucian froze. The boy smiled shyly. "You're the man from the drawings." Lucian blinked. "Drawings?" The boy nodded. "Miss Alina told us stories about the man who stopped bad people." Alina flushed. "I simplified things." Lucian crouched, meeting the boy's gaze. "Did she tell you he used to be one of them?" The boy shook his head. "No. She said you changed." Lucian smiled then, something soft and real. Then she told it right. That evening, after the clinic closed, they walked along the waterfront. Streetlights gleamed on the dark water. The city hummed with quiet life. Fishermen mended nets. Couples laughed in cafes. Elena's hand slipped into his. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. The power, the chaos. He thought about it. "It's like missing an illness," he said quietly. "You forget how sick you were." They stopped at the edge of the pier. The same sea that had swallowed his gun now reflected the stars. "Do you think they'll forgive you?" she asked softly. "I don't need them to," he replied. "I just need to forgive myself." She offered a faint smile. "That sounds like peace." He looked out at the endless horizon. "It feels like it." Months bled into a year. The world did not end. No one came for him. The old scars faded into stories told over morning coffee. the apartment filled with small noises, laughter, radio music, the scrape of pencils. The ghosts stopped visiting. One morning, Lucian woke before Alina, the first light touching her face as she slept beside him. He reached for a notebook, began to write, not confessions, not ledgers, but memory. The first line: "Once there was a man who thought redemption came in fire, but it came quietly, like dawn through a half-open window." He closed the notebook, stood, and stepped onto the balcony. Below, the harbor glimmered, fishermen already casting nets. Church bells chimed. He breathed deep, the air cold and new. Behind him, Elena stirred. "Lucian," she murmured, still half asleep. "What are you doing?" "Watching the world wake up," he said. She smiled without opening her eyes. "Tell it good morning for me." He did softly, to no one and to everything. The day began again, ordinary, imperfect, alive somewhere beyond the horizon. The past still existed, but it no longer owned him. Lucian De Rossi was no longer the man in the newspapers, the ghost in the docks, or the boss in the shadows. He was just a man, standing in the light, learning what it meant to live when there was no one left to fear. And for the first time, dawn didn't feel like judgment. It felt like grace. A year later, the sea around Zadar looked unchanged, calm and endless, but the city itself had transformed. The new clinic, on the corner of Kalara Street, basked in sunlight spilling through wide windows onto walls painted the color of dawn. Inside, children's laughter echoed. Elena moved with purpose, a clipboard in one hand, a smile ready for every small face that needed it. Her days had found a steady rhythm, the pulse of a place that mended what the world broke. At noon, she stepped outside. Across the street, Lucian knelt beside a row of saplings, soil staining his hands. The clinic's small garden, his idea, was a place to grow instead of destroy. "Still planting soldiers?" she teased. He looked up, sun glinting off the silver streaks in his hair. "No soldiers, just roots," she smiled. "You're late for lunch." "I was waiting for them to stand on their own," he said, brushing dirt from his palms. "You know how it is." They walked back together, the silence between them no longer heavy, just familiar. Inside, the children had drawn new pictures on the clinic wall, a house, a sea, and two figures standing in the light. Lucian paused. "You told them that's us?" Elena shrugged. "They figured it out." He laughed softly. "Smart kids." Later, as the day faded, Lucian locked the garden gate and watched the sunset burn gold over the water. Elena joined him, slipping her hand into his. "Do you ever think about the past?" she asked. "Only when I need to remember why this matters," he said. They stood in quiet communion as the light dimmed and the world turned blue. For the first time in years, Lucian saw no ghosts in the dusk, only tomorrow. The wind carried the faint scent of salt and blossoms from the garden. Somewhere behind them, a child laughed, sharp and bright as the ringing of a bell. And for Lucian Rossi, that sound was enough.